Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here. I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for what you do for students. It's an exciting job that we have. It's a challenging job that we have, and it's also an empowering job that we have. And so I want to use our time together, first of all, to chill, relax, and have a good time, to provide some substance, and most of all, to remind you what it felt like to get that acceptance letter to Teachers College, no matter how many years ago that was. That person still exists inside of you, and I'm going to remind you of that person today. So I also want to thank the guidance counselors and the educators that were at the Guidance Counselor Forum at St. Clair College last fall, and it's because of you that I'm here. Some of you actually texted a picture of my business card to Ange, amongst many other texts to her to ask me to be invited, so thank you very much. You'll see throughout my slides that I reference nature, because so many solutions to our problems exist in nature. Not just in nature, but in our nature. And it's when we fight against exactly who we are and what we're surrounded by that we forget that we don't just live in a wasteland. We're that plant that blooms despite some of the circumstances, just like our students. So today is just as much about you and maybe your spouse or your child or your neighbor or your student, because everything you do for yourself, you do for your students. And so that's why today is about chilling, relaxing, having fun, and then learning something. Because when I spend time with someone, I see it as the beginning, not the end. So I started, well, first of all, I'll give you a summary. There's a lot of words up here. But essentially what I'm going to talk about is that, especially this time of the year, that we have to recognize what our strengths are despite our challenges. And I'm going to go through a formula for doing that. It's called the 3 C's of hardiness, and you have a handout in front of you. You don't have to work on it till midpoint through. You might not want to, but it's a way for you to frame what I'm talking about in your own words, because you have to put it in your own words to apply it. I come to you right here, not because it was my first plan. This was never my plan A. My plan A was to be a psychologist. I'm still a psychologist, but that was my plan, and that was all I ever planned on doing. Until I had the opportunity to, yes, be laid off from a position as a psychologist, a challenge, in Windsor, Ontario in 2003. I was laid off from the Catholic Board as a psychologist. I was hired for a 1-year contract on an ISA grant, and I actually found out, I had no idea, that the colleges taught psychology. So I started teaching in psychology in the fall of 2003, and before that I'd been working full-time in 2 different school boards as a psychologist, the second one in Windsor, and I fell in love with the classroom. The irony is, my research was on teacher enthusiasm, but I had no interest in teaching. All I wanted to do was be with students as a school psychologist. I go backwards. So about October, the Catholic Board called me and asked me back. It was kind of nice, because they'd found money to hire me, but at that point I realized I didn't want to go back. So part of what I'm going to talk about today is a lot of your peak moments, optimal experiences, aren't because things went well. They're because things didn't go well. Because that's where we build our strength. We need stress. We need stress to inoculate ourselves against bigger stresses. And what can we do for ourselves and for our students to frame it in a way that they can see it? So can everyone just take a deep breath with me right here? And let it out. And part of that is being in the moment. I see some of you on phones because everything's an emergency, but that's one of the things that take us away from this moment. So initially, psychology was all about what's wrong with you. So this is where I have about traditional psychology. And in the late 1990s, 1998 to be exact, Martin Seligman, a famous psychologist out of Penn State, who had studied learned helplessness for all these years, gave his presidential address at APA and realized, after looking at the research, that the ratio was 99-1 for researching negative emotion, maladjustment, abnormal psychology to one for the positive side of it. And what he was beginning to realize is that positive psychology does not ignore what's wrong. It strengthens us so we can use what's great within us to face our challenges. The beauty of positive psychology, and I'll talk about it throughout this presentation, is that it really helps with the stigma associated with psychological disorders. Because when we open the door to all the wonderful things that are existing within us, then we open the door to talk about psychology. We literally take it out of the closet, and you're not afraid to talk about it. You're not afraid to be open about it. And that's something that's very important in my classroom. So my early research was on teacher enthusiasm. Up till then, the assumption was if you were excited about what you were teaching, it was just entertainment. But what I was able to show in my research was that you can frame the material with gestures, with voice, with eye contact, with smiling, in a way that it signals our students to what's important, engages them, maintains almost like one-on-one conversation, and retains memory that much better. And because of that, as I talk about my philosophy and have a chance to hear about your philosophy today, positive emotions aren't just for feeling good. There's nothing wrong with feeling good, but they have a significant impact on our intellect and our ability to recover and flourish during challenge. So when I practiced, and I started practicing, I got my PhD in 1998 from Western, and I finished my exams for the College of Psychology in 1999. My specialties in counseling psychology and school psychology, and within counseling psychology and health psychology, that's this area of flourishing, positive psychology, all of that. And I put this up here because what I wanted to share, just like your own method and mission in the classroom, as a leader, as a principal, as a superintendent, as a guidance counselor, as a parent, one size does not fit all. So depending on the client or the student that I'm working with, it's really important that we flow and we change. And so these are just some of the ways that I really like to focus my work. And another thing I've had the opportunity to do, as you heard my introduction, is I've written 2 psychology books, and a third one's coming out, and I'll be giving these out today, and they'll be based on who answers my questions first. Prizes always work. So what is positive psychology? Well, one of the theorists, Dr. Wong, who's Canadian, talks about 4 main areas of positive psychology, really the pillars. And the second one I'm going to focus on today is resilience. The interesting thing about resilience is every single one of us in this room has experienced trauma or could be experiencing trauma, extreme stress, any difficulty imaginable. But the research shows that if there are 200 people in this room, about 50 of us will have resilience, or what's called protective factors, that allow us to lift us through whatever the challenge is. And what's important to know is that they're trainable. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So really the first third of my presentation is just giving you a general overview, and then I'm going to get more specific into resilience and how we can teach it. So resilience isn't anything fancy. It's really ordinary magic. It's good relationships, good food. Did you have a good lunch? Good sleep. Did you have a good night's sleep? Yes, no, maybe. It's quiet. It's fitness. It's really adaptability. So when things don't go your way, how adaptable are you? We tend to be a lot more adaptable when we're young and less so as we get older. You don't have to be that way. We have to look at how change and how we embrace change allows us the opportunity to be adaptable and flexible. Like I said before, if I hadn't been laid off the job as a psychologist, I never would have experienced the fact of how much I love teaching. And as you'll see as we go through this presentation, that is my first passion. Equal up there with my husband, but he's teaching and my marriage. So it's your number 1 and 2, or 2 and 1, depending. Flexibility, how flexible you are, how well you recover from trauma. So all of us, when we first experience trauma, will have not a positive response. It'll be negative, but how quickly do you respond? And so the great analogy for resilience is the palm tree. We think about the palm tree, Aruba, the Caribbean, even Florida. But what's interesting to know about the palm tree, and some of you may already know this metaphor and know enough about trees, back to nature, is that palm trees actually benefit from hurricanes. That when palm trees experience hurricanes, and think of a hurricane in your life that you've overcome or maybe going through, that they bend all the way over and then come back. And their roots are strengthened by the wind. So unlike an oak tree that will snap because it's not flexible, a palm tree is a great metaphor for resilience. Another interesting way to look at traditional psychology versus positive psychology, and the work that you do in success and achievement and the well-being of students, is we tend to focus all of our efforts and energy at the bottom of this graphic. So mental health, nominal mental health, so not the best case scenarios, symptoms, disorder-oriented, whereas positive psychology looks more at the top, which is improving your lifestyle, the way that you cope, are you problem-focused versus solution-focused. The beauty of positive psychology in combination with traditional psychology is it takes care of 100% of the population, not just 20% of the population that's struggling with mental illness. It's all of us. And those struggling with mental illness. It benefits everybody. So there's no question here, this is why you're here, because we see our students stressed, they're depressed, we pick it up, we see it, and there's no questions that Canadians are experiencing stress in epic levels. That's a given. From the original picture that's looking at the drought. And why we need to know about resilience is that there's certain characteristics about individuals that make them more vulnerable. The diathesis stress model, the diathesis is a vulnerability. So, for example, this isn't the exact statistics, but 40% of the population, say 40% of the population is born with the gene for mental illness, or born with the gene for depression. But only 10 to 15% of that population actually manifests that disorder. What makes the difference? What makes the difference is the reason why you're here. It's stress. That a stressful life event is enough to push somebody over. You could have twins with equal predispositions towards mental illness, and if one of them experiences extreme stress, then they're more likely to manifest the mental illness. But what's most interesting, and this is why I call it the positive side, not just me, but positive psychology, is it's not the stress that breaks us, it's the perception of the stress. That makes all the difference. So if you see stress as bad, it'll kill you, literally. Aren't you glad we got to the happy part of this presentation? If you see stress as good, you'll use it to motivate it through. So we're going to look at models of flow and where that all comes in. Stress is bad, death. Stress is good, not death. I'm glad we can laugh. We have to laugh. So back to what the risk factors are for mental illness, and as I'm showing you, if you look at any kind of model with mental illness with vulnerability and protective factors, we could do something about the protective factors. Education is one of the greatest things that you could ever do for yourself, you included. Being here today, by the time you leave, your brain will not be the same. It will have that many more neural connectors that will act as a protective factor for stress and other brain disorders like Parkinson's, some types of schizophrenia, Alzheimer's. So stress, we can't do anything about gender. We can do something about physical health. The final doom and gloom of today's talk is that when we have multiples of the risk factors. So assessment is everything as a psychologist. Assessment is everything as a teacher. We have to see where they are before we know where we can take them to. So if somebody has 2 risk factors, they have 4 times the chance of mental illness. And if they have 4 risk factors, they have tenfold. You know that, but this just breaks it down by the research. So let's get to the solutions. Because there are solutions. There definitely are solutions. So when I talk about looking at stress as either good or bad, what I'm talking about with you, with your 4-year-old, with your 7-year-old, with the 17-year-old student in your class, is choice. We all have a choice in how we're going to view it. And one of the things I do often as a professor is I reframe for my students. So when I hear the negative talk, the helplessness, is that I will remind them. I teach mostly collaborative nursing at St. Clair, and I taught with Vicki Houston, one of your superintendents in the tech studies program at the Teachers College, is that I'll remind them that they're paying for the pain, and it's called tuition. Think about how many areas of your life that you are choosing. The second that we blame or complain, we give away everything. We give away all of our control, even if it's only 1% of it. So you have a choice. Are you going to step forward into growth or backwards into safety? So as I was mentioning earlier, one of the most important things that we do is a needs assessment and a strength assessment. And I can hear a collective moan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, you haven't been taught it right. So Maslow was one of the first positive psychologists out there. And what happens, all of us climb this mountain of Maslow day in and day out. And day in and day out. And if we're at the bottom, if we think physiological, when I asked you, how was your lunch? Did you sleep well? Physiology often is the reason why our students are stressed. It's not school, that's at esteem, it's physiology. And we could all have a long conversation about cell phones, yourself included. But physiology, if they're overstimulated, if they're poorly fed, if they are going to bed with their phone underneath their pillow, all these things will keep them stuck in deficiency. So the bottom 2 are, you'll stay there until they're taken care of. Safety, money. So when you get thinking about money, with students at school, if they're feeling bullied, one of the first things I'll ask a student if they're one of my clients is, I need to see your social media account. What's happening online that is leading to you feeling unsafe? So my philosophy when I teach and when I do an assessment, or when I work with anybody really, is to get a sense of, are you well fed? I mean, have you slept well the night before? And once those 2 are taken care of, emotional is when we start to look at relationships. So look yourself on your sheet of paper on the back. You could just put out the pyramid and assess where you are. So in terms of self-esteem, is anything intellectual. So you want to rise up the ranks in the school board? That's under esteem. Self-actualization, your ultimate goal. This is your commitment. And so when you're feeling stressed, is it really that you're just hungry? It sounds so simple, but hangry is a term. How much of your stress is because you're not sleeping well? Take responsibility for your sleep. Take responsibility for your food. Exercise. How much do you need to burn off steam for going through a walk? How many of these things could make all the difference in the world? And then in terms of esteem, I will get referred students that are misbehaving in the classroom, but they haven't been properly fed because what's happening in the home. They're feeling unsafe because they are not connecting with their peers, that their emotional needs aren't being met. So this is just a good way to go in and see how much of your stress your students can be taken care of by looking at this. So we will stay at the bottom in terms of the deficiency needs before we go through the top. So if you look at, I'm just showing you protective again, how important the school is and different protective factors that can make a difference. So what kind of atmosphere do you set up when your students come to see you? what is it like in the school? So for me, in the classroom, when we talk about positive social climate, how students are received, and you think back to when you were in high school or elementary, makes all the difference. When you're excited to see your students, when you are telling them, like literally telling them that they're the main reason that you're there that day, that I will say, and I have no qualms about it, my students pay for my salary. I have no problem saying that. So I have how many bosses? I have about 300 bosses every semester, and that's the truth. Because I'm as accountable to my students as I am to my boss, as I am to you, the taxpayer. And I'm okay with that, because it is what shows them and reminds me of what my allegiance is to, which is my students. Students first, all the way. So this is the beginning of the model that I'm going to share with you. So back to nature, the cornfields. How many of you were at that guidance counselor forum? Nice to see you again. This is where I talked about my history as a corn detasseler. This is another reason I'm here. How many of you have no idea when I talk about corn detasseling? Okay, you're afraid to put up your hand. I was raised in Kent County, and at a young age, we had a choice of corn detasseling and making $2 an hour, or weeding my mom's garden, my mom and dad's garden. I chose the $2 an hour. But I remember coming home and saying to my parents, I better get straight A's because I don't want to work in the fields for the rest of my life. The reason the cornfields are up here is because the term hardiness is based on what's called hardy corn. They're developing crops around the world that are able to withstand drought, and it's called hardy corn. And the 3 C's of hardiness, once they named it, came out of an early study that was done in 1981 by Dr. Maddie, working with the Illinois Bell Company. And very similar to Windsor, Ontario, they'd gone through a lot of downsizing. In fact, the entire Illinois Bell for the state in 1981 was cut in half the number of employees that were left behind. So there's no question that it really impacted the employees that were left. So if half the workforce was there, what was interesting is that it only impacted 2/3 of the employees. 1/3 thrived under pressure. And what they found is they had a set of attitudes that allowed these employees to work even harder, be more creative, and enjoy their job more. And it was called the 3 C's of hardiness. So that's what we're going to go through now. The first one is challenge. So I'm going to ask this question for the first prize. If you can think back in time, or maybe currently, where a challenge has happened in your life that has led to something more positive. And I promise not to get too Dr. Phil on you. We want to talk about your first marriage and your second marriage. So what is a challenge that is... So what is a challenge that has happened in your life that has actually led to something more positive now? Okay, if you want to come up to the microphone, please. You ready?
I had, needless to say, an incredibly difficult pregnancy, life-threatening, and as a result, obviously having a beautiful son who's now 6 and in grade 1.
And what's his name?
Anderson.
Anderson. Cheers to Anderson and his mom. Can you come up to the front? Thank you for sharing. And so when you're committed to the outcome, speaking of marriage, if you're not committed, every fight is going to drive you crazy. But if you are committed, okay, I'll take it for the team. Thank you, thank you, thank you, enjoy. Okay, I'm looking for another volunteer that wants to talk about a challenge, maybe even a current challenge, well, maybe, or a past challenge, that has led to something positive in your life right now. Anybody? Okay, if you want to come up to over here, please. Microphone right there. Yeah, deep breathe. Good for you. Dana.
Right after I became a teacher, I had a life-threatening accident, and I was off for 10 years, having surgeries, 15 or 16 surgeries. And now I'm back teaching, and I'm student success this year, and I love it.
It's amazing.
It's great.
Round of applause for Dana. That's excellent. If you want to come to the front, I'll give you a book. See, when we're in the midst of a challenge, we forget the challenges that we've overcome. And that's a really important role we can play for, congratulations, and 2 challenges, really. That's a really important role that we need to play for our students, because when they're in it, and when we're in it, no matter if it's traffic or something big like we've just heard, it feels like it's going to go on forever. It's like the thing about stress. It's like a moment in time. Like when you get a text or an email and you think, oh my God, we go from 0 to 6, I'm fired, I'm homeless, whatever it is. That in fact, it's small. And if you're an overachiever, and I know in this room, there are room filled with overachievers, success, overachievers, that you're going to go from whatever the stressor is to something huge. And that's the way our brain works, actually. Our brain is the same as the brain of a reptile. Isn't that wonderful? And so when we're under stress, we're in the bottom, we're in the basement of our brain, we're in the amygdala, we're in the limbic system. And when we're thinking straight, you know when you reread an email and you miss like 7 words that said everything's fine, but you only got the like, you're in trouble, all of that. When you go back and you reread it, you're like, oh, everything's fine. Because your cerebral cortex, the penthouse of our brain, is working. But because of the fight or flight, everything's like a tiger that's going to get you. And somebody could be right beside you and saying, you're just fine. And you're like, no, it's not going to work out. Everything's going to be terrible. I can't believe I just said that response. Because we're in the basement of our brain. So that's why when we talk about challenge now, it's important to really surround ourselves of reminders of sanity. And that's why our screensavers should say breathe. And that's why you should think twice about whatever your password is. Don't shout it out, but it could be something like a nice word, and so that you're putting that in your brain every time you check into whatever it is. So challenge is reminding us that stress is an opportunity for improvement. Do we have any runners in the room? Okay, so we have more than that, I'm sure. Are any of the exercise or even education the runners? When you first run, you're lucky to get through a mile, but you don't run a mile for the rest of your life. That you build up, whether it be 10 miles or a marathon or whatever it is. The whole idea is that we're going up and down from the basement of our brain to our penthouse. In the same way, when we run, we're going to go longer, faster, harder. So you want to remember that stress is like money. It's the price we have to pay to get to Arizona or Florida or the Caribbean. I have no idea where you're going at Christmas, but I'm coming. So all things are difficult before they're easy. And I have a feeling that in this room, we have some adrenaline junkies that don't like it too easy, that actually invite difficult. But when it shows up at your door, you're like, you're at the wrong door. They're not. You invite them. And it's the whole idea that we think about ourselves, we think about our students. They're doing math. But miss, why do I have to do math? We have calculators. No, they have cell phones. Miss, why do I have to do this? We have that. Because so often when we're in challenge, when it's difficult on the way to easy, we forget that it is preparation for greatness. And our job as a teacher is not to make it easy for our students. We make it hard. I'm friendly, but I'm not your friend. I make it hard for them, but I support them. I make it encouraging. I give them feedback. But half the time our students probably don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Just like half the time, we don't know why we're doing what we're doing. Until that baby's born, until 10 years after recovery, until you get to that second marriage, whatever it is, that all things are difficult before they're easy.